If you are not going to be actively involved, especially leading the business going forward, an earnout is not a great structural component. So if you're going to stay on and run the business and maybe not own it anymore, but run it, and you have some agency and control over that income statement, then it makes some sense. I mean, it should be there really to bridge a valuation gap. That's why they were created. I think it's worth X. The seller thinks it's worth X plus 20%. The way to make them both right is to have a performance earnout over the course of some time. We had Wade Duncan, managing director of our origination team, on the pod today. It was a lot of fun. Wade started many years ago, 13 years ago now, on our transaction team. And he was what we call a deal lead, senior associate, and leading deals. And he gained a lot of experience. He sort of got to interact with buyers and sellers doing that role. So really good sort of proving ground for him. And then migrated over to our origination team many years ago, and has spent a lot of time working with prospective sellers and then leading a team that all day, every day talks to prospective sellers. So who better than Wade to talk about what's in the mind of a business owner that is contemplating a sale? We decided to focus on earnouts today. And that is one that gets a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, a lot of perceived notions, many of them earned, to be honest. So we wanted to make sure we demystified the earnout today and really got in depth on why the earnouts exist, when it's appropriate to use, when it isn't appropriate to use, what it's supposed to do, and what it really doesn't do very well. So hopefully you get a lot of information out of today's podcast. I thought Wade brought a lot of great questions and good energy, and really excited to have him back on at some point in the near future and talk about something else related to M&A. Hope you enjoy this episode, guys. Cheers. Welcome to Closing Remarks. I'm your host, Dara Shareef. We have with you today Wade Duncan. Wade is a managing director and one of our operational leads of our origination team. Wade, welcome.
Thank you, Dara. Appreciate you having me on.
Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I started with Benchmark here about 13 years ago, and initially I was hired on our deal transaction side. I oversaw deals as one of our deal leaders, and spent some time on the transaction side of the business. Eventually, after doing a few deals and learning a lot about M&A, made a transition to our deal origination side, where I became one of our directors who would meet with business owners out on the road, have the conversations with them about their companies, kind of understand those businesses and really deliver kind of what our value proposition is. And I did that for a good while too. Had a lot of success, and there was a need internal. And so working with our CEO at the time, kind of recognized that need and made an internal move where I've been overseeing our kind of fresh deal origination efforts for the better part of about 7 years now. What we do internally is look at companies that we feel like are good quality businesses that we want to have initial conversations with, engage them in conversations, and of course, get them to that job that I used to do, right? Meeting with the field director and eventually becoming a client.
That offers really good perspective, right? So you've been on both sides of the business. You know what it's like to do deals, what it takes to sell a company, what's attractive, what isn't attractive. And now you know what it takes to get a client interested in signing our contract, engaging with the process. That's a pretty unique background.
Yeah, thanks. I thought so. Everybody kind of told me in the beginning, you're going the opposite way that people usually go, right? You usually start on the sourcing side and move to the transaction side, but it made sense to me. And it was something that I was interested in. I was really interested in engaging with business owners, having conversations about their business. It's fun to learn about companies too, and help them start the journey that they're going to go on, hopefully eventually, pursuing the eventual exit transaction for their companies. So that it's always been so much fun.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you on. So we wanted to bring you on because you talk with folks who talk to business owners constantly, and you do also talk to business owners. So you've got great perspective on what they're looking for and what the questions that they have, and maybe more importantly, the ones they don't know to ask.
Yes,
right.
Sir.
So I think today we're going to get specific on earnouts. Right? Is that the topic of the day? We're going to talk about earnouts and dive in.
We're going to talk about earnouts,
Okay.
yes, because that is something that comes up a lot.
It is.
And I think that just getting into like a real understanding of what an earnout is, what that looks like, how it functions within a transaction, within a deal itself, will hopefully help people to get just more clarity around it.
There's certainly a lot of misperceptions, misconceptions about
Mhm.
earnouts. Some of it's earned, right? But it's good to dive in, I think, because we need to demystify the earnout today. We've been using that word demystify a lot here on this podcast. We're trying to open up the curtain and expose the little guy pulling the levers. So let's talk about earnouts today.
Fantastic. Well, I kind of like to just start with like the very basic part of this, and what you would say is the explanation of what is an earnout.
Yeah, it's a good place to start. So an earnout is literally the business after the transaction happens, earning a portion of the deal,
Okay.
right? So a typical deal isn't 100% at close, right? So if you have a $20 million deal, you don't often see a $20 million check at closing, hand over the keys, and off you go. Usually there are elements that are deferred, right? So you get a piece that's cash at close. Maybe you get a retained equity piece that the client keeps a piece of the business, or maybe there's a seller note. And oftentimes we'll see an earnout. And what it does, you're probably going to want to understand as an audience member why you use an earnout, right?
Mhm.
So, and one thing I would say is think of it as if you're a fan of football or baseball, think of a quarterback who may be coming off of an injury and he's signing with a new team. And this is a prolific quarterback. He wants $40 million. And the team is saying, well, given your current condition, we'd offer you 18. 18 million, 40 million is a big gap there to bridge.
Huge difference.
Big difference. So how do you bridge the gap? You do it with performance incentives in the contract, right? We've seen this happens a lot. Hey, you compete in 14 games, you start in 14 games. Okay, that's a trigger. You get $500,000 or $4 million. Take the team to the playoffs, another $6 million, right? You win a Super Bowl, $8 million. That's what we're talking about here is performance-based. Now, the key is, though, we can't make it look like compensation because there's a taxation issue. We'll probably get into that as well. So again, an earnout is really just deferring a piece of the compensation for a deal to a later point that requires performance of the business based upon key metrics that are agreed upon at the time of closing.
Yeah. I mean, that makes total sense. I think a lot of the, questions around earnouts comes from just some skepticism of, we were talking about kind of like what is an earnout, and then you got into like how it actually works,
Yeah.
right? Performance based, et cetera. I think where business owners hear the word earnout, they're thinking about, at the time of transaction, I'm giving up control of the business, right? And how am I going to, make sure that whatever the earnout is achievable? I can earn that money, right? So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, what maybe some common situations
Yeah.
are and how they unfold.
Yeah, so I think that's a really informed question, and hopefully potential sellers, clients are thinking that way. If you are not going to be actively involved, especially leading the business going forward, an earnout is not a great structural component. So if you're going to stay on and run the business and maybe not own it anymore, but run it, and you have some agency and control over that income statement, then it makes some sense.
Mhm.
I mean, it should be there really to bridge a valuation gap. That's why they were created. I think it's worth X. The seller thinks it's worth X plus 20%. The way to make them both right is to have a performance earnout over the course of some time,
Mhm.
right? So the best way to structure an earnout for a seller is to make sure that it's based upon something that is hard to manipulate.
Mhm.
What's the easiest thing to manipulate? Net income, the very bottom of the income statement,
Mhm.
right? Because you can just start burying all kinds of costs as a buyer into this business after you've acquired it. So think of someone who owns 7 businesses, and you can start burying some costs from one of your other businesses in the income statement of the one you acquired.
Yeah, it's pretty common.
You feel fine, right? You're fine about that. You're paying that money regardless. That encumbers that income statement to the point where that seller may not get their earnout. So how do you fix that? There's a lot of ways you can fix it. One way is, hey, let's just make it based upon revenue. You're not going to manipulate revenue, probably. Now, if you're on a cash basis, you might hold some checks in the drawer December 31st and cash them in January. Just from a taxation perspective, we hear that that's possible. But the real way to do it, in my view, is one, you start with the highest point on the income statement you can, which is revenue, maybe gross margin. And then what you can do is so that you don't really encumber the buyer wants control. And you don't want to take away that control. They've bought the business. You want to give them the opportunity to, hey, let's hire a marketing person. Well, marketing can be expensive. Think of a company that has never spent money on marketing, brings in a marketing director and a team and spends $1 million a year going forward. There's a lag of a couple of years before you really start seeing a benefit. So that seller is not going to get the benefit of it in their earnout. That's a problem. You cure that by saying, hey, buyer, do whatever you want. It's your business. But for the purposes of calculating the earnout, we're going to have the income statement treated as it was when we sold the business. So any new expenses that that were not a part of that income statement at closing aren't included. So you have a separate income statement. That's how you judge that earnout, based upon not the actual income statement, but based upon the one that you agree upon at closing, right? So, and another way we see it is like GAAP accounting versus as they customarily sort of done their accounting work. A lot of clients in the lower middle market and even the middle market are not GAAP compliant. If you're cash basis, you can't be GAAP compliant, just by definition. So a buyer is saying you have to be GAAP compliant, and they're buying a cash basis business. You've already got incongruity there. You have a problem already. So you really want to lay that out in a way that it's documented. That avoids the frustration later on and litigation. There can be a ton of litigation in earnouts, and it's usually because there's not a lot of work done to get very laser focused and specific on what's being measured, what counts, and what doesn't.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually going to go to, a perspective here, right? The perspective of the business owner. And so early on in the conversations in deal origination, we would be talking to a business owner about, you are, interested in maybe pursuing a transaction for the business, right? And we're going to start a journey together. And I think a lot of that fear comes from this unknown. And so we focus heavily on, a lot of the details of the company, the financial performance, some of these, certain things that you could say would, improve the value of the business, right? But as a seller, you're thinking about how am I going to earn the money, the value for the business, and you don't know who the buyer is. And so we really focus heavily on the fit, but like situationally, right? I think you would, I'm not going to kind of, add your thoughts here, but if you're really thinking about, how do you craft the best earnout? Do you think that depends a lot on the fit, the buyer, like in the moment, right? Understanding that this seems like something we can do together. Maybe you could talk to that a little bit in the structuring of the deal based on the fit and the goals of these two parties together.
Yeah, I'm going to say yes. So
for sure. I mean, 100%. Right? Yeah.
Right. So to all of it. So you craft an earnout that's purpose built. That's how I would say it. So if the biggest risk from a buyer's perspective is that you have one customer that is 38% of your revenue, and maybe it's not even contractual. It's just, hey, every year they rebook, but there's no contract. That's a risk. So, they might tie the earnout not to performance, but based upon just keeping that customer, right? And that makes a lot of sense because that business is worth something different if that customer goes away. So the earnout might be 100% tied to that, right? So as long as it's purpose built, I think you have to make sure you figure out what is you're trying to solve for. I mean, earnouts are great to confirm your diligence as a buyer, right? So you're doing 90, maybe 105 days as a buyer in terms of due diligence. You'll learn a lot, but you're going to miss some stuff. And if the seller is that convicted, has that level of conviction post-closing, that they're going to keep, they're willing to defer a piece of the purchase price and make it contingent upon performance, that's great. That is great conviction that shows the buyer that their diligence is likely strong. And it acts in a lot of the same way that like retained equity does. Like both are used to sort of ensure that the seller, once he sells or she sells, continues to act like an owner. They're incentivized to keep driving. And as long as you align those incentives with what's best for the organization, the enterprise, and that's about crafting the right metrics, I think you've got alignment.
Yeah. I mean, so like in this conversation, we're talking about earnouts and everything sounds, like it almost like good, right? Situationally good, of course. Why is there a thought that an earnout might be bad, right? Where is this coming from?
Yeah.
Is it something that happened a long time ago that, maybe people are just like, they've heard a bad story? Is it that, they're, just, I don't know, bad earnouts crafted that, maybe business owners pursue on their own through a transaction, don't know certain nuances of that? Like, why is there a stigma around it sometimes?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of negative components to an earnout, and most of it is actually earned.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So a bad advisor and a bad set of attorneys are going to do a poor job of documenting that earnout. And that will very likely cause litigation. There's a lot of litigation around earnouts.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got a really good team crafting it, if it's thoughtfully crafted and you're protected with the purchase documents, purchase agreement, and the ancillary documents, the definitive agreements, they tend to be serve the purpose at least.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't mean you're going to actually get your earnout, right? So there are some things like, you think of a cliff earnout. So, hey, you've got to achieve $20 million in revenue in year one and $21 million in year two, get your earnout. Well, if it's 19.7 the first year and it's binary, it's either you get all of it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
That seller's not going to be very happy. But that's bad structuring.
Right.
We wouldn't structure it that way. We don't do that. We create ratable earnouts. You set a floor, maybe that's 18.5. And you start between 18.5 and 20 million, you're ratably sharing in that earnout, right? So, if the floor is 18.5 and you get another, $185,000 on top of that, you get 10% of the earnout,
mm-hmm.
right? It scales that way. And at 20, you get the full earnout. Another way to protect the seller is to actually have, if it's a 2-year earnout, have a catch-up provision. So if they want, 20 and 21 in consecutive years, that's 41. If you're 19 in the first year and 30 in the second year, you've crushed it, right? You've absolutely obliterated
mm-hmm.
that target, but you'd only get half of the earnout because you missed in the first year. That doesn't make a lot of sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you create a catch-up provision where you're made whole because that second year, sort of cures the first year. So there are lots of ways that a really good advisor and a competent attorney, and I say that intentionally, I think you need a really good advisor, and then the attorney doesn't have to be, at Skadden Arps or one of the, biggest law firms in the world. You want someone who is an M&A attorney,
mm-hmm.
not someone who did your wills and estates, not someone who handled your divorce, but dabbles in real estate. Like, you need somebody who knows how to do deals and has seen earnouts, because all they do is M&A. So there's a lot of reasons why they have a negative association. I think earnouts should be used to bridge a valuation gap, not for buying the company as it stands today. So that company today that's, say, worth $20 million, if the seller wants $28 million, the way you bridge that gap is to say, well, you believe it's worth more because you think it's a growth story.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, prove it.
Yeah.
That we can get you that extra $8 million, but that business has to grow over the next 3 years, say, and we'll give you an earnout. And if it does grow as you say it will, and we hit the targets and you hit the targets, we would happily pay $28 million for that business. But as it stands today, it's worth 20 to us. It's a fair use of an earnout.
Mm-hmm.
To use that earnout, though, to get to the 20, when the inherent value of that business is 20, that's not what it's built for, right? So you see a lot of buyers using earnouts just because they don't want to pay. Like, they want to create a headline price, mm-hmm. that's $20 million, but they only want to give you the 15, say, and have you earn 5 of it. Now, there's also the version of an earnout that is sort of like a maintenance earnout, which is, hey, you're doing, again, let's say 20 million in revenue. We just want to make sure that this business can continue creating that $20 million in revenue over the next couple of years, because we're worried that, say, it's really founder dependent.
Mm-hmm.
And even though you're going to stay on, you're less involved because you're not an owner anymore.
Mm-hmm.
How do we maintain that earnings stream, that revenue stream? Let's just make sure this is maintained. We don't need to grow it, or you don't need to grow it to get your earnout. Just keep that 20 for a couple of years. That's very different than saying, like, hey, I need 10% growth over the next, 3 years, and I'll pay you based upon that growth. That's different. If you've grown 2% a year for 10 years and they want 10% for the next 3, that's unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not real money. And so there's a lot of folks out there who say, don't spend that money. Don't count on it. And those kinds of earnouts, yeah, that's earned. Like, you're not likely to make that earnout. If it's based upon maintenance, if you've got a modicum of control post-closing, you're involved, you're still leading the business, that's a different story. you should expect to hit those targets. And if you don't, if you've documented it correctly, if you've got good structure around it from a legal perspective, if you don't hit those targets, then you should look in the mirror. I mean, you have to take accountability there. So I do think there's a lot of reasons for it, but we've had plenty of clients who've hit their earnout targets and things have gone quite well.
Yeah. Yeah. I know we've had a lot of clients who have hit their earnout targets and gone very well. I mean, I'm sure we've had clients who have gone above and beyond, right? And
Yeah.
had great transactions deals that, in the future, right, got them more money. And a normal conversation that I have with somebody just in the early stages about their company, right? We'll be talking about, the potential of value for the business and like kind of what's this worth, right? And somebody may say something like, if they did this, you could 2x it overnight, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I had time to focus here, you could
Right.
XYZ thing, right? So really grow the business. I've always viewed an earnout in a way that's almost like this is the extra to help you accomplish this goal. And so my question is usually like, well, why haven't you done that? And so, maybe just looking into that from that perspective, that lens, right? Of like when you're using an earnout, there's a lot of good to it if you're aligned.
Right.
And I think, you've done so many of these deals, an insane number of deals. Would you call this more of a tool? I guess
It should be. I think it is a tool when it's used properly. It shouldn't be one that it isn't sort of like a crescent wrench, right? It isn't one that you can use for a lot of different things. I don't think. Now, I've seen people use a crescent wrench than hammering a nail, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've also my sister-in-law also used her cell phone once famously to hammer in a nail. That did not go well. I would not advise it. But I think
you got to have the right phone cover for it, right? I've seen the Instagram ads.
You do. This is before the the advent of like the iPhone. This is an old school flip phone. This is back 20 years ago. So, and I'm sure she'll see this and not be excited about that. I mean, I think it is a tool, and it should be used, in my view, to bridge a valuation gap.
Mm-hmm.
And when you use it to replace something else, like like a seller note, I think that's problematic.
Mm-hmm.
I do. Because and also I would say this, and I've seen this a lot recently, folks disguising seller notes, a promissory note, as it's an earnout in disguise.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're saying, hey, we're going to pay you this over the course of time. It's a note, a seller note or a promissory note, but you have to hit these sort of targets. You have to hit these targets along the way. Oh, by the way, we're not paying you interest on it. You're just calling it something different. That is an earnout in disguise. We're seeing that more and more, and it drives me crazy. And it's just trying to sort of retitle something that has existed forever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with an earnout as long as it's used properly, and you're using it to sort of make sure that the seller has still got conviction in this business going forward, and to sort of share risk.
Mm-hmm.
Between buyer and seller. Buyer comes in, I've only had this thing under my diligence for 100 days. I can only look at so much. I don't know what I don't know. So I want to portion this risk here. I want to split it in half. You take some, I take some.
Mm-hmm.
Because the buyer is taking most of the risk, obviously. The seller has to take some of that burden. That's what the buyer is saying. As long as it's used correctly, I think it's a tool that makes a lot of sense in certain circumstances. And in others, it's not appropriate. I also think it's a good proxy for an earnout, and vice versa, is retained equity, because they kind of accomplish the same thing, right? So both will have a seller act like an owner post close. You want your employees to act like an owner.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just thinking of selfishly of say their compensation. They're thinking about driving value as long as you're incentivizing using the right metrics, right? So pick a bad metric, then you can create a moral hazard there. But if you've got a good metric and you're driving the right activities, it's good for everybody, right? So that's kind of where I land on that.
Do you find them to typically be more situationally dependent? Like, I want to, take the company to the next level with a strategic partnership, or like I want to retire, right? Like maybe maybe there's some sort of earnout component there, or do you find it more related to like industry, company type, certain characteristics on businesses just inherently that invite more earnout in structure?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I don't know if I thought of it that way before. So I would say certain industries will attract more earnouts than others, but maybe more sort of maintenance earnouts. I mean, there are certain industries that have founders that are, or businesses that are very founder dependent. And my view as someone who has been on the buy side a bit years ago, I would want to make sure I mitigate my risk when you have very obvious founder dependence,
Mm-hmm.
and that founder is going to go off into the sunset at some point.
Sure.
And that's when an earnout makes a lot of sense for sure, right? And again, you're talking about, hey, how do you make sure that this person is going to stay engaged and that they're not so important that when they do peace out, that this business doesn't go with it, right? So yeah, I think in that regard, it makes a lot of sense.
So when you've got a business owner, they're looking at a deal, and we're working with them to structure the deal,
Yeah.
right? Are there any kind of like barriers on what's possible with an earnout? Could you extend that to, internal team? Could you extend it to, whatever it is, right? Like what are the limits of it?
Yeah, I think it's a buyer and seller getting together through their advisors and figuring out what's important, what's measurable. I think it's really important that it's measurable, right? Because it's got to be an agreed upon measure that's easy to measure and track. It makes a lot of sense when it drives value. It sounds trite, but it's true. So you can measure a lot of things, but you want to make sure that you're aligned that this is an important thing for the business, and it's an important thing in terms of apportioning risk. So you can really pick anything. Like we've seen almost everything. What I worry about is when you start tying it to continued employment. And again, we're not tax attorneys here. We're not attorneys at all here, frankly. We do review a lot of legal documents and a lot of taxation stuff, but we're not really qualified attorneys and accountants. Let's be very clear about that. But if you structure an earnout where it's tied to being an employee, unless it's structured correctly by the right law firm that has not just a really good M&A attorney, but a really good M&A tax attorney, you could find the seller face treatment from a tax perspective that is not advantageous. So think about compensation. Compensation, your salary, your bonuses, are taxed at ordinary income. And if you've got an earnout that's a $5 million payment, a year from now, that's the highest tax bracket. You're going to pay a big chunk of tax at 40%, right? If it's treated as it should be as deal value, as like postponed deal value, that should be 23.6%, right? The 20% capital gains plus the Obamacare rider that they add, right? So that's a 20%. It's almost double the tax, right? So, and that's just structuring. That's just language, right? That's crafting the earnout agreement and the purchase agreement in such a way where it actually documents what's actually happening. This is deferred purchase price. This is not compensation. It's a really big one. Again, that $5 million at that 20% delta in taxation is $1 million in that. That's a big deal, right? So you need to have really good people structuring it correctly.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. People who know what they're doing. Personal opinion and perspective, right?
Yeah.
But, you have to see a lot of things to know what you're looking at. If you're on your journey, right, going down, whatever, you have your guide with you. You have your guide because they've been here before. They know where they're going. They know what to handle when it shows up in front of them. And they also know, hey, let's do it this way, not this way. And if you're doing that on your own, I mean, that you might not know what you're looking at, right? It might look like something that it's actually not. So that's great insight. Thank you.
Well, you've given me the analogy. We've talked about this before with the elk guide. Why don't you give your elk guide analogy?
Yeah. So, yeah, you want to go hunt an elk. I'm going to go out west, and I'm going to get a guide, right? I don't live out there.
Not yet. Never with that attitude.
Yeah, right. But you want to go hunt an elk, and usually what you're going to do, coming from no experience, is you're going to plan to take a multi-day trip, going backwoods. You're going to hike out. You're probably going to get a guide. And why are you going to get a guide? Well, probability of success if you have a guide is significantly greater.
Yeah,
somebody who knows where elk are moving this time of year. Somebody who knows how to call for them, how to move around wind, all these things, right? You're increasing your probability of success. Hopefully you can successfully harvest a nice bull. But there's also the situation where you run into a grizzly bear.
Right.
And you want your guide for the purpose of the hunt. You want your guide to help you find the elk. But if a bear shows up,
Yeah.
you also want your guide to be the one that stands in between you and knows how to handle that situation, because you're probably not going to know what to do in that moment.
Right.
And it's going to be scary.
Yeah. And you probably don't have a bear gun on you coming from Florida.
No, you probably don't.
Right.
But really, like, just best practices, you've got to like stand your ground with that with that bear in that moment with that grizzly. And you've got to, make yourself look big and scary. Right. And like, I don't know, a lot of people have that reaction of like, I need to get out of here.
Yeah. And they start running after you.
And then they catch you.
Yeah.
So I listen to a lot of podcasts, right? In my truck, driving to work, right? Going to wherever. And, I think like a lot of people probably do that, right? You run your podcast, and, a lot of business owners are out there. They're listening to closing remarks, right? They're looking for your advice, your insight, your help. And I'm a business owner today thinking, yeah, I don't want an earnout, right? But like what is the piece of advice you would give to that business owner before they totally write off, whether or not an earnout could work for them in a transaction for their business when they actually pursue it?
No, I think it's a great question, and probably the most important question you've asked. And I think the general answer I would give is that don't presuppose that any structural component of the deal, any buyer type, is the right one for you today.
Mm-hmm.
If the best outcomes happen when the seller goes in entirely open-minded. I've had great deals where the client said, I will not keep a piece of my business. Gary Coker, who sold his business many years ago, Central EMS, he said, I will not keep a piece of this business. And I had to explain to him how private equity works. And not only did he take the 20% at the end of the deal, he said, can we increase it to 30%?
Mm-hmm.
Because he understood. Now, he went against his own viewpoint because he became more educated in the process, and he fell in love with a buyer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what I would tell you is that an earnout, if addressing a specific concern, if used properly and documented by experts to the point where it's entirely clear whether you're going to hit or not, you should know without question whether you're going to hit your earnout. And you should know very clearly halfway through the year if you're on track to hit your earnout,
mm-hmm.
because it's been so well documented. It's perfectly aligned, and you're working toward targets that are best for the enterprise, and they're within your control in some way, that they can't be gamed. In those circumstances, be open to it. But I wouldn't want to have my deal sort of reliant upon an earnout. I'd want my stretch deal be reliant upon an earnout. If it's used to bridge a valuation gap, if a seller has an aspirational number and really wants that extra piece and it's important to them, and they also recognize that I need to hit some targets to get there, it's contingent upon performance, which is fair, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's actually fair. And you're spreading the risk between buyer and seller in some way. I think that it can be a really useful, as you said, a tool.
Mm-hmm.
But it shouldn't be a core structural component of any deal, in my view. So again, best outcomes always happen when you go in with an open mind, get smarter through the process. Most people who sell a business do it one time.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have experience. They haven't done it before, so it's new, right? And if you have Benchmark doing the deal, you're going to get a bunch of offers. We're pretty good at this stuff. So you're going to see a lot of different versions of a deal from people. And it may turn out that the buyer that you fall in love with, they need to see an earnout. Now you've got some questions, right? And if you've already closed your mind to it, then you're not working with that buyer going forward. And maybe that buyer is the one that can take your business to the next level. Maybe they'll treat your employees like family, like you do, right? So always, and I think just generally in life, it makes a lot of sense to go in with an open mind and with very limited information, don't make decisions, right?
For sure.
Unless you have to. If you're playing blackjack, you kind of have to make decisions based upon limited information. But life is not blackjack. You're allowed to take in new facts on the ground as they emerge and use them don't be so set in your ways that you're not going to be sort of more informed and smarter by by what's happening in and around your life. So that would be my closing remarks on that is that, hey, let's take in what we're observing. Let's be open-minded. You're not, it isn't like you're a traitor to yourself if you've gone against what you believed all along.
Huh.
I think, people who are high functioning folks, and our clients are high functioning people, they're lifelong learners. They're informed by what they see every day. And an earnout, again, it's just like that. Maybe the deal that is right for you has an earnout, and you haven't betrayed yourself by taking it.
Absolutely. Great point on that. And an early conversation I'm focused on when I'm talking to a business owner is let's set value aside right now, right? We need to find the right fit. And I think, it's hard to understand that so far ahead of, that the end result, right? What is the outcome? But truly, preparing to go on this journey, right? If you're really focused on, let me find the right fit for me in my business for what my goals are moving forward, like that's the first part, right? If you don't have the right fit, you've had deals where it's not the right fit, it's not the right fit. What happens in those deals?
They don't go well.
They don't go well.
They don't go well. So the client that's looking at the headline number, we don't have a lot of those, frankly.
No, we don't.
Thankfully. I mean, I think, I say this probably more than I should, but I think this process really is about sort of monetizing your life's work and also finding a caretaker for your legacy.
For sure.
And for a lot of our clients, they're equally important. And for some, frankly, the legacy part is more important. Taking care of their baby, which is their business. Taking care of their employees, which are their family, is more important than the number. Because if you're making 20, 30, $100 million, if you take 10% less, you're still going to create generational wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can still buy a lot of Lambos.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of contenders and a lot of snowmobiles and a lot of jet skis and house wherever you want it. So it is, and of course, listen, for a lot of folks who are high functioning people, the cash is more like a scoreboard than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes it's time to put the scoreboard down and just focus on, the time you have left. And, if you're, listen, I'm 53 years old, and I talk about this a lot too, probably more than I should, but I think at some point in your life, your time becomes more valuable than your money. And I'm getting there, man. I said it. You were at the speech. It's a horse race, man, and it's getting real close. I think my time is catching up to my money in terms of what's more important. Pretty soon it's going to overtake it, and that doesn't mean I'm out of gas, or it means that I have a family that I want to spend as much time with as possible. So do our clients, and I think that has to be part of your rubric. And again, that goes back to being open-minded. What's important, and being sort of giving yourself the comfort and ability to change your mind as more facts emerge. And maybe you thought, hey, I want the most money. And during the process, you fall in love with a buyer who's the third highest bidder. But you think that they're going to do the most with it. And you remember that was your grandfather's company and then your father's company. And now it's your company. And you want to see that in the right hands. And that matters more to you than an extra couple $1 million. Right. So that open-mindedness is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. If I could have said it better, I'd probably be running the podcast.
Well, you might. I mean, at some point, you're a lot younger than me, so we're going to have somebody take over at some point here.
I'll need a lot more reps on that.
Yeah. Well, I need more reps too. We're getting there, but I appreciate you coming on, Wade. This has been a great conversation. You as the stand-in for the audience and representing our origination team, who talks to more business owners than pretty much anyone on the planet.
Yeah, we talk to a lot of business owners.
You sure do.
Lots of conversations. And so, I mean, thanks for having me on, man. It's been enjoyable. I always learn something from you.
That's fun.
Every single time.
That's great. Well, I'm making this stuff up as I go along, so I'm learning too, as I say it. I'm like, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, you're learning stuff, but I think, a lot of people out there, right?
Yeah.
Watching the podcast, following the podcast, from internal team, external business owners, right? Like, subscribe, and share.
I have to say
absolutely. Yeah. Well, sorry, I took that.
No, thank you.
Stole that moment.
Someone has to say it.
Yeah. No, it's just, it's great information, great insight, super transparent, genuine. And, you're the best person to do it, man.
I appreciate it. And we're excited to have you on. We're going to have you on again. I mean, you're the right guy to have on. We've had a couple other folks from our internal team on, and I think we're going to make sure we do that more regularly because, again, we want to be talking to business owners, their spouses, their centers of influence to make sure they are sort of in the room.
For sure.
And the best way to do that, other than having them in the room, is to have someone who talks to them every single day. So I appreciate you coming on, and we'll do it again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Dara.
And remember, in business and in life, best outcomes aren't found, they're built.